In 1968, Chevrolet started building a Corvette that should have ended the argument with Ferrari for good. Engine behind the driver. Transmission turned sideways. A patent filed by Zora Arkus Duntov himself. That car was approved for production twice, once in 1970 and once by the chairman of General Motors in 1977, and Chevrolet built exactly none of them. Not because it failed a test, and not because a rival beat it. What ended the mid-engine Corvette was a number in a Chevrolet sales report, and that number was so good it made the car impossible to justify. The car is called the Aerovette, and by 1977 it was not a sketch or a clay model. It was a running, driving, fully engineered Corvette with a small block turned sideways behind the seats, gullwing doors, and a drag figure of 0.325 at a time when most American cars were shaped like bricks. It weighed 2,200 pounds. It had a digital instrument cluster in 1976. Chevrolet had been building it, in one form or another, since 1968. 4 complete rebuilds on a single chassis, 2 production approvals, 0 cars delivered. So let's start under the engine cover, because the whole thing turns on one piece of borrowed hardware. Putting the engine behind the driver is easy to say and expensive to do. The engine has to drive the wheels sitting right next to it, which means a transaxle, a combined gearbox, and differential built specifically for the job. Ferrari had one, Lamborghini had one. Chevrolet had nothing, and nobody at General Motors was going to fund a brand new transaxle for a car that was already selling out. So Duntov went shopping inside his own company. The Oldsmobile Tornado was a front-wheel drive car. Its entire drivetrain sat crossways at the front, engine and transmission side by side, linked by a Morse chain instead of a conventional shaft. Duntov took that package, turned it around, bolted it in behind the seats, and used it to drive the rear wheels. The output ran through a set of bevel gears into a shaft that passed through a tube cast into the engine's own oil pan. That's not a typo, by the way. A Corvette built to embarrass Ferrari was running on the hardware from an Oldsmobile family car, and it worked. It worked well enough that the patent office agreed. Duntov filed in January 1969, and the patent came through in May 1971. Read the drawings, and you find something else in there. The layout left room for a second shaft running forward to a front differential, which means the mid-engine Corvette was designed from the start to accept all-wheel drive. Why go to all that trouble? Because of where the weight ends up. Move the engine behind the driver, and the mass concentrates in the middle of the car, so it changes direction faster and puts more load on the rear tires under power. Every serious racing car in the world had already worked this out. The Corvette hadn't, and Duntov had wanted to fix that since 1957, when the Corvette SS ran at Sebring and the heat pouring off the engine made the cockpit almost impossible to sit in. His note from that period was blunt. Heat source must be behind driver. 2 running prototypes were finished in the spring of 1969 under the code XP882, and the numbers on them are worth hearing. A 95.5-inch wheelbase, right around 3,000 pounds. Weight distribution of 44% front, 56% rear with the 400 cubic inch V8 in place. With the 454 big block installed, the drivetrain package on its own weighed 950 pounds. And it carried 11.6 cubic feet of luggage space, which is more luggage room than a mid-engine car has any right to carry, and was a deliberate answer to the first objection anybody raises. Underneath the skin, it was a welded steel platform tied into boxed steel frame members, with a steel birdcage built into the main frame and fiberglass panels over the top. It was only ever drawn as a coupe. Chevrolet expected the federal government to ban convertibles outright, so nobody wasted the time. Chevrolet painted one of the 2 cars metallic silver and put it on the stand at the New York Auto Show in April 1970. There hadn't even been time to name it. The card on the floor read Corvette Prototype, and the reaction was loud enough that GM's own engineering policy group approved the car for production as a 1974 model that September. Then the money moved somewhere else, and the car went back on the bench. What came back was lighter. In 1972, the same chassis reappeared under a new code, XP895, wearing an aluminum body built by Reynolds Metals. Reynolds put the skin at 1/8 of an inch thick, in an alloy called 2036 T4, and the saving at about 40%, roughly 400 pounds out of the bodywork alone. Take 400 pounds out of a car and it accelerates harder, stops shorter, and burns less fuel, without touching the engine. That aluminum car still exists, and it is one of the only aluminum-bodied Corvettes General Motors ever put together. But the version that came after it didn't have a V8 in it at all. In November 1970, General Motors paid $50 million for the rights to build the Wankel rotary engine. In today's money, that's north of $400 million. The plan was rotary engines in the Vega, rotary engines in the Monza, and a rotary Corvette sitting on top of the whole thing. A rotary has no pistons. Instead of 4 strokes running up and down a cylinder, a triangular rotor sweeps around inside an oval housing and completes all 4 in one continuous turn. Fewer moving parts, less vibration, and far more power for the space it occupies. 2 rotors could live in a hole a V8 would never fit into. Chevrolet built 2 rotary Corvettes. The small one was a 2-rotor car with a steel body from Pininfarina in Italy, sitting on a shortened Porsche 914 chassis, rated at 180 horsepower. Bill Mitchell, who ran GM Design, hated it and wanted it destroyed. Hold on to that, because it comes back at the end. The big one is the car people remember. 4 rotors, in the same XP 882 chassis, under a glass wedge that stood 42.5 inches tall, and went to the Paris Auto Show in 1973. Getting 4 rotors meant bolting 2 twin-rotor units onto a common shaft, an arrangement nobody in Detroit had built before or has built since. Those doors are worth a look on their own. A normal gullwing needs a lot of clear air above the car to swing open, which is fine at a motor show and useless in a parking garage. Chevrolet's version lifted at the hinge and then broke at the elbow, folding back on itself so the panel stayed tight to the roof. The side windows were fixed in place and doubled as part of the structure, which saved weight. The nose and tail were deformable and painted in body color. Now, before we go any further, the power figure needs a hard look, because this is the part almost every retelling skips. The number that follows this car everywhere is 420 horsepower. General Motors never officially rated the engine. The better documented figure from the 2 research units that went into it is around 350. Duntov told Car and Driver the car ran 145 miles an hour and got to 100 quicker than a big block. The historian Wallace Wiss, who drove the 2-rotor car in period, has written that GM never had a genuine 4-rotor engine at all, just 2 engines chained together well enough to move the car onto a show stand under its own power. Nobody has ever settled it. The car is sitting in Michigan and the argument is still running. The rotary program lasted 4 years and never sold a single car. Fuel economy, emissions, and the oil embargo of 1973 finished it. There was a mechanical problem underneath all 3. The tips of each rotor ride on seals that scrape against the housing wall thousands of times a minute, and in 1973, nobody had worked out how to make those seals last. General Motors announced the first delay on December 21, 1973, and pulled the program entirely by the fall of 1974, which left a very expensive show car with a hole in the middle of it. So the rotors came out and a 400 cubic inch small block went in, still mounted sideways, still driving through that Oldsmobile-derived transaxle, now paired to a turbo-hydromatic 425 with a high stall converter. The pop-up headlights were redrawn, the louvered engine cover was swapped for a clear glass window so you could see the V8 through it, and the doors became proper gullwings. In 1976, the car finally got the name it kept, Aerovette. Here is what it actually was on paper. A 95.5-inch wheelbase, 188.5 inches long, 42.5 inches tall, 71.6 inches wide. Front and rear tread within 1/4 inch of each other, 61.2 and 61.4. Curb weight of 2,200 pounds. A steel and aluminum birdcage under a fiberglass skin, rack and pinion steering, and disc brakes on all 4 corners. Then the aerodynamics. The windshield lay back at 72 degrees, and the finished shape returned a drag coefficient of 0.325. That is a better number than almost anything sold in America at the time, and Chevrolet got there while still building in 10-mile-per-hour bumper protection. The instruments were fully digital. An LED cluster that read green up to 7,000 revolutions per minute and turned red above it. In 1976, while the production Corvette was still using needles. In 1977, the chairman of General Motors, Thomas Murphy, approved it for the 1980 model year at $15,000 to $18,000. With a 350 cubic inch V8 in the production version, it never got built, and the reasons were all about the car. Chevrolet's sales department had listed them years earlier. It would cost more than the current Corvette. It wouldn't be faster. There was no more room inside. There was no convertible. The engine sat behind a fixed bulkhead and was almost impossible to reach, and at first it would only come with an automatic. Every one of those is a complaint about the machine. Then there were the sales figures, and they finished the argument. 46,558 Corvettes in 1976. 49,213 in 1977, the year the 500,000th car came off the line. 46,776 in 1978. Then in 1979, while the Aerovette sat approved and unbuilt, Chevrolet sold 53,807 Corvettes. That is still the highest single-year Corvette production figure in history, and the base coupe listed at $10,220. 53,807 front-engine cars at $10,000 each, against a mid-engine Corvette that would have cost $8,000 more, held less, and been harder to service. David McClellan, who had taken over as Corvette chief engineer in January 1975, ran that comparison and canceled the car. His judgment was that a front-engine Corvette could be made to go just as fast for less money. The C4 that arrived in 1984 proved him commercially right. It sold. If you've ever stood at a car show arguing that GM never took the mid-engine idea seriously, this is the part worth knowing. They took it seriously twice. It lost on a spreadsheet both times. All of the cars survived. The Aerovette and the aluminum XP895 both sit at the GM Heritage Center in Sterling Heights, Michigan. The two-rotor car came closest to being scrapped. It had been shipped to England years earlier as a temporary import, crated up and stored in the roof of the Vauxhall plant at Luton for about a decade, and it was scheduled for the crusher. A British Corvette specialist named Tom Falconer heard about it and got GM's design chief to release it. He eventually fitted a Mazda rotary and painted it back to its original red. It runs. In 2020, 43 years after the chairman signed off on it, General Motors finally sold a mid-engine Corvette. The patent underneath the idea was filed in 1969. It took the company 51 years to build what it had already approved twice. So here's the one we want your answer on. If Chevrolet had put the Aerovette in showrooms for $1980, at $18,000 against a $10,220 front-engine Corvette, would you have signed for one? Or would you have taken the cheaper car and the bigger trunk? Drop it in the comments. And if you want the other half of this story, the 5 race cars Duntov hid from his own bosses to keep them from being destroyed, that one is on screen now.